everyone. Welcome back again for our continued series on the glories of Vrindavan Dham and the great devotees who have served that Dham. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachade Satarane. So, today I have the privilege to speak of a great devotee who, along with Srila Narottam das Thakur and Srinivas Acarya, carried on the Sankirtan movement after the disappearance of Lord Caitanya. And he's one of my favorite devotees. That's the illustrious Syamananda Pandit. In the Shyamananda Sataka, the 100 verses glorifying him, written by his disciple, Rasikananda Murari Das, we hear in verses 3 and 4, and I quote, I offer my respectful obeisances to the great devotee who, because he delights, Ananda, the three worlds, with the bluish nectar of Lord Krishna, Shyam, the poets call him Sri Syamananda. He is the king of the devotees of Lord Krishna. He reveals the secret truths of the beautiful gopis, dear to Braja's handsome prince. He is the son of Shri Dwarika Devi and the merciful spiritual master of all the worlds. O people, if your hearts yearn to taste the rare sweet nectar of love for Lord Krishna, if you wish, without the troubling of great searching, to find the Chintamani jewel of ecstatic love for Krishna, and if you are attracted to the great treasure of spontaneous love for Lord Krishna, then, with all your heart, please always worship the Kalpavriksha tree that bears the name Sri Syamananda. Hare Krishna. And as I was researching for this lecture, excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. As I was researching for this lecture, I found that our acharyas often say that Syamananda Pandit was one of the greatest stalwart Vaishnavas to have ever graced our Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya, Vaishnava Sampradaya. So in Prema Vilas by Nityananda Das, it is said that in Goloka Vrindavan, Syamananda Pandit is Kanaka Manjari. Kanaka Manjari. And this great devotee, he was born, or he appeared, in the year 1535 in the month of Chaitra in a village called Narendra Bahadurpura in West Bengal. And in the Bhakti Ratnakara, we find that Shyamananda Pandit's father was named Krishna Mandal, and his mother was named, again, Shri Dwarika. We heard about her in that previous shloka. So therein, in the Bhakti Ratnakara, it stated that his parents were, quote, exceedingly pious people of impeccable character. Exceedingly pious people of impeccable character. Unfortunately, it's also mentioned that all of their previous children died at birth or shortly thereafter. And therefore, when Shyamananda Pandit was born, they gave him a very unusual name, Dukhi. Dukhi means sad, one who is sad. And why did they give him that name? It's explained because they were hoping that Yamaraj, the god of death, quote, assuming he was so unhappy, would not bother him. Dukhi. They gave him that name, thinking that Yamaraj wouldn't bother him because he's an unhappy one. I won't take him. So, like all great devotees of the Lord that we've been discussing the last few months, as our little Dukhi, the sad one, grew up and attended school, his teachers were astonished by his ability to learn difficult subjects like Sanskrit grammar and various types of poetry and rhetoric. But one thing that everyone noticed was that from very childhood, he was very much attracted to hearing the pastimes of Lord Caitanya and Lord Nityananda. And as he grew up, he quickly realized the importance of diksha, of taking shelter of a spiritual master, of initiation, and hearing about the extraordinary devotion of a saintly person named Sri Caitanya, who lived in Ambika Kalna. One day he came to his parents and he said, "Can I journey there? I want to take shelter of Hridaya Chaitanya as my spiritual master." And he was still young, and they were impressed by this realization that in such a young man, that the importance of taking diksha. But they were a little nervous because the trip to Ambika Kalna was, in those days, it was again through jungle and dangerous. But finally they agreed, and he left. And upon arriving in Ambika Kalna, he found his way to Hridaya Chaitanya's ashram, and it's described that when he walked in, Hridaya Chaitanya was absorbed in meditation on Krishna Balaram. He was a deeply realized devotee in Sakyaras, in the mood of friendship with Krishna, like the cowherd boys in Braj. But as soon as Hridaya Chaitanya saw the young Dukhi come in, his meditation broke, and he stared in wonder at the boy. It's written that, quote, a virtuous man is able, as a virtuous man is able to easily recognize other virtuous men, and as expert jewelers are able to identify diamonds among many pieces of glass, so Hridaya Chaitanya understood that the newcomer, Dukhi, was a highly qualified devotee. Quote, qualified to worship Lord Krishna. This is how it's written. He realized he was a highly qualified devotee, qualified to worship Lord Krishna. So in the months that followed, our Dukhi won his Gurudev's heart by his interest in hearing Krishna Katha, especially Gauranga Katha, Nityananda Katha, and his Guru Nishtha, the devotion he had in his spiritual master. One time I asked my dear godbrother, Tamal Krishna Goswami, what was the most important quality that a disciple can have in service to his guru? He immediately replied, Guru Nishtha. The most important quality we can have as devotees is Guru Nishtha. So on the Falguni Purnima in the year 1553, Hridaya Chaitanya initiated him, and he gave him the name Dukhi Krishna Das. Dukhi Krishna Das. And as time passed, he served his spiritual master in various ways. But one day, Dukhi Krishna Das requested Hridaya Chaitanya if he could travel and visit various holy places. And pleased with his service and his progress in Krishna consciousness, Hridaya Chaitanya immediately gave his permission. And Dukhi Krishna Das spent the next 8 years on pilgrimage. 8 years, visiting many holy places around India. And I was thinking that we see this in the lives of all the great devotees, really, that we've been discussing the last few months, how they've taken time to visit holy places for inspiration in their spiritual lives. And our great Acharya, the pioneer of the Krishna conscious movement in recent times, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he sings about this in his famous song, Shuddha Bhakata Charana Renu, about his desire to travel to holy places. Many of you may know this song. He writes, Madhavatiti Bhakti Janani Jetane Palana Kori Krishna Bhashati Boli Parama Adare Bori Gora Armara Sesabastane Korolo Brahmane Range Sestabashtana Horabi Ame Pranayi Bhakata Shange. He writes, The holy days, like Ekadasi and Janmashtami, are the mothers of devotion. For those devotees who respect them, let the holy places of Krishna's pastimes be my places of worship, and bless me. Let the holy places of Krishna's pastimes be my places of worship, and bless me. May I always visit all the holy places associated with the Leela of Lord Caitanya and his devotees. Hare Krishna. And by the time that Dukhi Krishnadas, when Dukhi Krishnadas arrived back in Ambika Kalna 8 years later, his Guru Maharaj was waiting for him. The spiritual master is always eager to check up on the progress of his disciples because he considers that as actually his main service. Although he may be preaching, in his area or in his country, around the world, really a spiritual master considers that his disciples are his most important service because they have dedicated their lives to him, put trust in him to deliver them back home, back to Godhead. And of course, it's a transcendental investment, you could say, because those disciples will go on to continue spreading the Krishna conscious movement. So Hridaya Chaitanya was waiting for him. And when he came back, Hridaya Chaitanya was amazed to see how much advancement he had made in devotional service, visiting holy places. And in appreciation of his progress, Hridaya Chaitanya entrusted Dukhi Krishnadas with the service of daily watering a flower garden which produced flowers of various kinds exclusively for the deity worship of the ashram's deities. There was a flower garden reserved just for them. We see this in India, that especially in previous times, the kings who controlled any territory, they would, help establish the temple, and then they would give, many acres or many hectares of land for the service to the deity to grow fruits and vegetables, etc., etc. So Hridaya Chaitanya, in his ashram, they were worshipping, guess who? Lord Caitanya and Lord Nityananda. This is, of course, some time after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had left. So it was considered a very special service to water the flowers that were growing for Gaur Nitai. So Dukhi Krishnadas, he very happily performed this seva, I could say, what's a good word, religiously. And every day he would fill pitchers of water from the Ganges, place them on his head, carry them some distance to the garden, and water the flowers. And then repeat the process. He'd go back down to the Ganges and he'd take the water, and then he'd come back, water the flowers, go back to the Ganges many times during the day. And I read that it's described that the mere thought that he was watering the garden of Gaur Nitai would make his eyes fill with tears of love. Just the thought of being able to render this, you could say menial service, watering flowers, but just the mere thought that he was watering the garden of Gaur Nitai made his eyes fill with tears of love. And I was also reading that in his ecstasy, he was even unaware of how many pitchers of water he brought each day. But gradually, over time, due to the friction of the pitchers, or you could say the pots on top of his head, wounds appeared on his head. And they soon became infected and unfortunately infested with worms. But being so absorbed in his service, he didn't notice the wounds and he didn't notice the worms. This is really transcendental to the body. But one day when he came to the garden with a pitcher full of water on his head, his Guru Maharaj was there, Hridaya Chaitanya. And as he watched Dukhi Krishnadas place the pitcher onto the ground, a worm fell from Dukhi Krishnadas's head. And observing him closer, Hridaya Chaitanya noticed that Dukhi Krishna's head was full of infecting the wounds and appreciating, his disciples' determined service despite what was happening. Hridaya Chaitanya's heart melted, and he embraced Dukhi Krishna Das. He brought him to his side, and he gave him a big embrace. And then it's described that he, quote, placed his hand endowed with mystic power on his disciple's head and made the wounds and the worms immediately disappear. Just see the quality of these devotees that we're discussing. It's actually described that a pure devotee has all mystic powers, but he or she generally don't show those mystic powers, again, because they don't want the cheap adoration of the public. They want the public to follow them for the kata, the divya gyan, the transcendental knowledge they're giving, which is infinitely more important than mystic powers, of course. But sometimes when it's necessary, we may see those mystic powers. So he placed his hand endowed with mystic power on the head of his disciple's head and made both the wounds and the worms immediately disappear. A few days later, Hridaya Chaitanya called for Dukhi Krishna Das, and he said, "My dear child, now I can see you are qualified to go to Vrindavan and worship Radha and Krishna. There, all your desires will be fulfilled by the great devotee, Srila Jiva Goswami. You take shelter of him, and he will continue to instruct you in Krishna consciousness." So I was thinking about that. He said, now you're qualified to go to Vrindavan, and now you're qualified to worship Radha and Krishna. We should note that, that at this point, Dukhi Krishna Das has reached a very elevated state of Krishna consciousness. And only then his spiritual master felt he was ready to worship Radha and Krishna and go to Vrindavan. Worship of Radha Krishna is very elevated. And Vrindavan's a very elevated place. On January 16th, 1970, Srila Prabhupada wrote to our dear God sister Jamuna Dasi, quote, "The worship of Radha and Krishna as they appear in Vrindavan is very advanced stage. So we worship them in our temples as Lakshmi Narayan." And in a letter on January 30th, 1973, Prabhupada wrote, quote, "For a conditioned soul, there is no possibility of worshipping Radha and Krishna. But we worship through Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Therefore, we keep Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu along with Radha and Krishna." So I was thinking that the conclusion is that we're very fortunate to be worshipping Radha and Krishna under Srila Prabhupada's guidance. I mean, it wasn't until a certain stage of his devotional service that his Guru Maharaj entrusted him to worship Radha and Krishna and to go to Braj. The same things holds true for being able to visit Vrindavan. It's also considered a very, very rare privilege. Sometimes we may take it for granted, but it's a very rare privilege. As we know, Rupa Goswami writes in Upandesamrita, quote, "Of the many objects of favored delight and of all the lovable damsels of Brajabhumi, Srimati Radharani is certainly the most treasured object of Krishna's love. And in every respect, her divine kund is described by great sages as similarly dear to him. Undoubtedly, Radha Kund is very rarely attained, even by the great devotees. Therefore, it is even more difficult for ordinary devotees to attain. If one simply bathes once within those holy waters, one's pure love of Krishna is fully aroused." So these are rare things, to worship Radha and Krishna, to go to Vrindavan. So hearing that, it just made me feel very blessed that we have this opportunity, this unlimited good fortune, all because of the mercy of our beloved Srila Prabhupada. The other day I was speaking to my son about something, Gaur Shakti, and he said, Pita, these days I never take anything for granted, materially and spiritually. And this is a good attitude. You know, they say, there's that saying, familiarity breeds contempt. So we have to be careful of that. We've been given so much mercy. I've many times recounted how Prabhupada's father told our Prabhupada when he was young, known as Abai, he said the Purusha, the Lord, the great Lord, he said he has unlimited arms and unlimited hands, he said to little Abai. And if he wants to give you mercy with all of those hands, how much your two little hands can hold? Purusha. Hundreds of thousands of arms and hands. And if he wants to give you all the mercy, how much your two little hands can hold? But we have so much mercy, if you think about it. And the honor of worshiping Radha and Krishna, worshiping them as Lakshmi Narayana, because in the mood of awe and reverence, until we have a firm understanding he's the supreme master and we're the humble servants, and then moving on to a deeper understanding of the Lord and his Vrindavan pastimes. But we're worshiping Radha and Krishna. And we're going to Vrindavan. In the past years, one could go whenever one wanted. And this is all by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. And there's that prayer to Prabhupada. O beloved spiritual master, you are always in the presence of the cowherd girl Radha, the daughter of King Brishabhanu. Please award me service at your lotus-like feet, which are the proprietors of devotional service. Please place me in the ocean of joy by bestowing upon me happiness in the mellows of service at the feet of Sri Radha in the groves of Brajadam. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki. So upon reaching Vrindavan, our Dukhi Krishnadas followed his spiritual master's instructions, and he sought out Jiva Goswami, and he surrendered at his lotus feet. And under the guidance of Srila Jiva Goswami, Dukhi Krishnadas, went deeper into his understanding, and through his seva, his realizations in Krishna consciousness. Tadvidi paripatena paripashana sevaya. First one inquires from the spiritual master about Krishna consciousness, and then sevaya. Out of gratitude, one puts that knowledge and those instructions to use in service, and by serving the realizations come. We get the jnana, but it becomes vigyan when we use the knowledge in service to Guru and Gauranga. That's the secret of devotional service. It's not enough just to study. We have to put that knowledge into action under the guidance of the spiritual master, and then the blessings come. So under Jiva Goswami, Dukhi Krishnadas learned very deep subject matters, and he continued to make progress. And at one point I was reading that he was spending most of his time in the service of Radha and Krishna inside an underground cave. He was living in an underground cave, meditating on Radha and Krishna with a fixed mind, while constantly chanting on his beads, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And now after some time, again, recognizing his progress, which was due to his sincerity and his determination, Srila Jiva Goswami entrusted Dukhi Krishnadas with another menial service. But, how can you say it's menial when you're doing something for the spiritual master? I mean, previously, Dukhi Krishnadas was watering the flowers in a garden, so that he considered that something extremely special. So Jiva Goswami, he gave Dukhi Krishnadas the service of sweeping. But what? Sweeping what? Sweeping the sacred place of Sevakunja every day. we won't go into much detail, but Sevakunja is where many of the most, the deepest pastimes of Radha and Krishna took place 5,000 years ago, and of course, in the unmanifest platform, they're taking place even today. That's why at Sevakunja in Vrindavan, there's a huge wall around Sevakunja. It's a garden area, a little forested area, not far from Radharaman temple and Radha Gopinath temple. But no one's allowed there in the evening, in the nighttime, because Krishna's having his pastimes with Radharani and the gopis, so it's forbidden to go in there. But Sevakunja is a very, very deep, esoteric place. So Jiva Goswami entrusted the service of sweeping there in the morning, to go there and sweep in the morning. And actually the practice of, you could say, serving the Dham itself, serving the Dham in such a menial way, it's called Dham Seva. Dham Seva. And it's an important part of living or visiting the Dham, to come to the Dham, and while you're here, do some Dham Seva. Now that Dham Seva can take the form of weeding gardens, cleaning the ponds or the lakes, sweeping the ground. I've seen devotees securing trees to their supports, planting and caring for flowers, or cleaning up, paved stones and pavilions. These are all services that can be done in the Dham. Usually we come, for parikrama, we're going to chant here, we're going to visit there, but we might also consider that, service to the Dham. Actually, the Dham is an expansion of Lord Balaram, technically speaking, and it's the playground of God. It's so sacred. All the opulence of Vaikuntha doesn't compare to one grain of dust in Sri Vrindavan Dham. So to have the consciousness that I'm here as a servant, I want to learn to serve my Guru Maharaj, previous Acharyas, the Vaishnavas, Radha and Krishna, or Mahaprabhu and Lord Nityananda, Panchatattva. But that also means we should also do service to the Dham. Clean up the garbage these days. That's one way we can take up service to the Dham. And but it has to be done in the proper consciousness. Everything in Krishna consciousness has to be done in the proper consciousness. But it's described that as Dukhi Krishnadas swept Sevakunja each morning, he was thinking, quote, "This is the same dust that once touched the feet of Krishna and his gopis." This is his mentality as he's sweeping. Oh, this is the same dust that once touched the feet of Krishna and the Braja gopis. And as he was thinking like that, it's described, he muddied the earth with a steady stream of tears. So therefore we can consider him a Dhamvasi. We often hear, I'd like to be a Dhamvasi. But that means a resident of the Dham. But we have to elevate our conscience. We have to qualify, right? Prabhupada said, work now, samadhi later. But for that day when we're sweeping the Dham and we're mudding the ground with tears of appreciation. This is the same dust that Krishna and Radha walked in thousands of years ago. And we will see that Dukhi Krishnadas' service to the dust of the Dham so endeared him to the Queen of Vrindavan, Srimati Radharani, that she decided to bestow her causeless mercy upon him. And actually the following amazing pastime I was reading shall ever be glorified in the pages of Gaudiya history. That's one Acharya put it. Shall ever be glorified in the pages of Gaudiya history. It just makes your heart beat, right? What is this pastime? So it's a well-known pastime, but I think perhaps many of you have not heard it, especially with some of the details I was actually able to mine out of take from the treasure chest of our shastras, some of the details. So one night, Lord Krishna and the gopis were absorbed in singing and dancing on a moonlit, under the full moon, in beautiful Sevakunja. And at one point, the pace of the dancing increased, to a very intense state, and a golden ankle bracelet named Manju Gosha, which was studded with beautiful sapphires, slipped off the left foot of Srimati Radharani and fell into the dancing arena, unnoticed by anyone. Her ankle bells slipped off because of the intensity of the dancing. And that ankle bell is called Manju Gosha, and no one seemed to notice. But, and they danced all night. Sometimes we hear they danced for a night of Brahma. So early next morning, Radha, Krishna, and all the gopis, they headed for their respective residences. And just after they left, Dukhi Krishnadas arrived for his sweeping of the Kunj. And on reaching the Kunj, he noticed, like jasmine creepers and other flowers like scattered everywhere. He thought, well, not normally that many flowers spread everywhere, leaves on the ground. And parrots, cuckoos, and black bees were singing morning songs with more enthusiasm than usual. And as he started his service, out of gratitude that he had this seva to the Kunj, he started rolling in the dust of Sevakunja, crying tears of joy and happiness before he even started. I'm so fortunate. So he rolled in that dust. We do that sometimes, don't we, when we go on parikrama? We roll in the dust. And we shouldn't hesitate to roll in the dust of Vrindavan. In Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's song, Radha Kund Tata Kunja Kutir, such a beautiful phrase. Radha Kund Tata Kunja Kutir. It's a poem in Saranagati. He mentions the dust of Vrindavan and how it's an impetus to him in his spiritual life, amongst many other things. A stimulus, and I'll read you the verse, and I'll read the verse where all these different stimuluses are described for in his poem. He writes, quote, "The cottage in the grove on the banks of Radhakund, Govardhan Hill, the banks of the Jamuna, Kusham Surovra, Anasha Ganga, the daughter of Kilinda, the Jamuna, with her many waves, Vamsivat, Gokul, Dira Shamira, the trees and creepers and reeds of Vrindavan, the different varieties of colorful birds," he writes, "the deer, the cooling breeze from the Malaya mountains, the peacocks, the bumblebees, the pastimes of the flute itself, the buffalo horn bugle, the footprints of cows in the dust of Braja, the rows of blackish rain clouds, springtime, the moon, the conch shell, and the kartals. All these I know to be very conducive for the pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I recognize in them a transcendental stimulus for making the Lord's charming pastimes more intense." Wow. Then he concludes, "I refuse to go anywhere if stimuli to devotional service is not there, for to abandon them is to abandon life itself." But my point is, therein is mentioned the dust. But we heard so many other wonderful stimuli for advancing in Krishna consciousness. And when we come to Braj, and we're walking around and going different places, we should notice these things and remember that they are stimulus to devotion and look at them and appreciate them. Govardhan, the banks of the Jamuna, the waves on the Jamuna, birds, deer, peacocks, bumblebees, rows of blackish rain clouds, springtime, the moon, conch shell, kartals, like Hare Krishna, Sri Radhe, like that. And he refused to go anywhere where there was not stimulus for devotional service. For to abandon those things is to abandon life itself. So one may say, but I'm leaving Vrindavan, I'm going back to Moscow, I'm going back to Almaty, I'm going back to Christchurch, I'm going back to Sao Paulo. Where's the stimuli? Well, when we're able to do book distribution, we're able to hold festivals, when we have a preaching center or we have a restaurant, or we can just say to someone, Hare Krishna. That mood of preaching, that itself is a huge stimulus. I was joking the other day, not a joke actually, this was a couple months ago actually, we were on the streets of Delhi somewhere and there was a lot of fumes, car fumes, and someone said, all those horrible car fumes, and I had to admit, I said, I don't really mind them because they remind me of street Sankirtan. You know, for so many years of doing Harinam on the streets of the cities of the world and distributing books, and when, right out there in the center of Kali Yuga, those things are there. Car fumes and, whatever, all kinds of horrible billboards and so forth. And I was saying, these things just remind me of Sankirtan. Just remind me of Sankirtan. So we don't have to be afraid to leave Vrindavan. And hopefully one day when the pandemic's over, get back to the real business of preaching Krishna consciousness. Now we're doing it, isn't it, through the internet. It's interesting. It's many ways the preaching's increased. I know my dear godbrother Vaisheshika Prabhu, great general in the Sankirtan movement, with his efforts to distribute books online. He was telling me the other day in an email, they're doing more books than, his preaching center's doing, or his temple's doing more books than they've ever done before. And they had that recent Christmas marathon where their goal was 2 million Bhagavad Gitas. So anything used in Krishna's service, you could say, takes on a spiritual quality. So the dust of Vrindavan, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is seeing that as just the dust, as a stimulus to Krishna consciousness, because it touched the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna. Just the dust. Usually you think of dust or the earth or the mud as the lowest thing, but it's one of the highest things in Krishna consciousness because it's touched the feet of the Lord. And in Vrindavan Mahimamrita, by Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati, he describes actually how the dust in Vrindavan is made of different substances, not just the earth, the Chintamani earth, but he describes the dust takes many forms. And I thought that was very interesting. He says, quote, I'm quoting Vrindavan Mahimamrita, in some places the ground of Braj is made of camphor dust. In some places the dust of Vrindavan is made of saffron. In some places the dust of Vrindavan is made up of ground up musk, perfume. And then he says, in some places, the dust of Vrindavan is made of the aromatic substances used in religious ceremonies, unquote. Wow. That's the varieties of dust. It's simply amazing. Through these acharyas, we see things as they are. So, Dukhi Krishnadas, after rolling in the dust and crying in ecstasy, he got up and he started cleaning and sweeping the kunj, when suddenly he saw a glittering object under a pomegranate tree, which was lighting up the whole grove with a golden radiance. And coming closer, he saw to his surprise that there was a divine golden anklet, or ankle bells, studded with sapphires, emanating otherworldly fragrance. The ankle bell. It's lighting up the whole kunj, and it's emanating an otherworldly fragrance. And it was just, you could say it was covered by the dust. It was just, you couldn't see it so well, it's just sticking up a little bit. So he had an iron spade, like gardeners have, which he would sometimes use to, in his process of cleaning the kunj. So with that iron spade, he very gently unearthed the anklet. And as soon as the iron spade touched the anklet, it turned into 24 karat gold. 24 karat gold. Then as Dukhi Krishnadas held that ornament in his hand, he felt currents of divine ecstasy surge through his body and his mind. Like you may have experienced, the other day I put my finger into a outlet by mistake in the wall here. I felt the current go through my body. So he held that divine ornament, Tadiya, the paraphernalia of Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani, the anklet that goes on her left foot ankle. And when he touched it, he felt this divine ecstasy surge through his body and mind. And then suddenly he heard an Akashvani, a voice from the sky. And that voice said to him, keep this anklet very carefully. Akashvani. Keep this anklet very carefully. And understanding that the anklet was not ordinary, obviously, it must belong to some exalted personality. He took a part of his cloth and he tied into that part of the cloth there to keep it safely. Now this is morning, and after coming home, Radharani realized that she'd lost one of her, it's described, favorite ankle bells. And she asked Lalita Saki, the guru of the gopis, to go back to Sevakunja to retrieve it. Now, generally such a service would go to one of her maidservants, just go find the lost anklet. But Radharani had reasons for sending Lalita, and we'll discuss that later. It comes out as the pastime evolves why she sent Lalita, not one of the manjaris. She sent one of her sakis. There was an important reason for that. So, disguised as an ordinary village girl, Lalita Saki approached Dukhi Krishnadas in Sevakunja, and she introduced herself as Radha Dasi. My name is Radha Dasi. I'm a Kanya Kubja Brahmani by caste, and I'm a resident of the village Yavat. And she said that the previous evening, her sister had come to Sevakunja to pick flowers, but she became frightened upon hearing the roar of a tiger, and she quickly ran away. Not noticing that the golden ankle bells on her left foot had fallen off somewhere in the grove as she ran away. So she asked Dukhi Krishnadas, because he's sweeping, if he'd found it. And he said, yes, I have found it. But his spiritual intuition, is actually described, told him that this so-called village girl was anything but ordinary. Lalita Saki was anything but ordinary. And he concluded that, she was hiding her true identity. And then, therefore, he said, no, I'm not going to give you the anklet. He said, I think I've found what you're looking for, but how could you and your sister, obviously, simple villagers, who are presenting yourself as simple villagers, how could you afford such a costly item? How can you and your sister, you're saying you're simple villagers, how could you afford such a costly item? So Lalita Saki, she's got this, she's always defending Radharani. She's got this strong nature. She said, well, we may be villagers, sir, but we're not poor. Now please give me the anklet. But Dukhi Krishna, he persisted. He said, dear girl, I want to see for myself if your sister is as wealthy as you insist she is. You take me to her, and if what you say is true, I will happily hand over the anklet. So by now Lalita Saki's getting impatient with Dukhi Krishnadas, but she could recognize, his own spiritual depth. And so she didn't want to offend him, so she restrained herself. She was getting impatient with him, but she didn't want to push him because she noticed something in him that wasn't ordinary. So she said, okay, if that's what the deal is, I will take you to my sister, and you will see who she is, and you will give her back her anklet. So she took Dukhi Krishnadas to nearby Lalita Kund, a kund called Lalita Kund there, not far away, and told him to bathe. So Dukhi Krishnadas was confused. He thought, if this girl's sister is a simple village girl, then why do I have to take a bath to see her? So he paused and he said to Lalita, young lady, can you please tell me why I have to bathe? So now Lalita was really getting frustrated because things were going too slow and she knew Radharani was waiting. So to facilitate the pastime and to give mercy ultimately to this great devotee, Dukhi Krishnadas, she suddenly revealed her original form as Lalita Saki. And upon beholding the, quote, unrivaled beauty of Radha's foremost friend, Dukhi Krishnadas fainted. So then Lalita Saki, she revived Dukhi Krishnadas with the touch of her lotus hand upon his head. And then to further give him mercy and the qualification for meeting Srimati Radharani, she gave him the famous Srimati Radharani mantra, which consists of 15 syllables and is full of 6 divine opulences. She gave him Radharani's mantra, which consists of 15 syllables and is full of 6 divine opulences. She initiated him into that mantra. And then she again requested him to bathe in the lake. And this time he did it very gladly. And he entered Lalita Kund fully dressed. And then he completely submerged himself. And as you're probably guessing, upon resurfacing, he was stunned to find out that he had taken on the form of a most beautiful 12-year-old, beautiful Brajagopi, complete with dress and ornaments. And then by the unfathomable potency of Yogamaya, who ultimately orchestrates all these pastimes, Dukhi Krishnadas as a gopi and Lalita Saki, quote, entered the unmanifest eternal feature of Vrindavan, unquote. Entered the unmanifest eternal feature of Vrindavan. As we many times discuss, there's the manifest pastimes that are there sometimes, like 5,000 years ago. But even when Krishna winds everything up and goes back to the spiritual world, simultaneously he remains in Boma Vrindavan, Vrindavan on the earth, and the pastimes continue. That's called aprakat, or unmanifest pastimes. And we should also think like that when we're in Vrindavan, riding on the rickshaw or shopping or these pastimes are going on. So how careful we have to be within the Dham, how respectful, how Krishna conscious we have to be. So the two of them enter the unmanifest, eternal feature of Vrindavan, where Lalita escorted this new gopi to a kunj, or a grove, where Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani was sitting on a throne surrounded by her friends. Now standing next to Srimati Radharani was Vishaka Saki. And when Vishaka Saki saw how Dukhi Krishnadas had assumed the form of a manjari and appeared as described as resplendent as gold, she addressed her, meaning Dukhi Krishnadas, in his form as a gopi. She said, "Oh, Kanaka Manjari, welcome home. Oh, for that day. We make it back to Braj. Welcome home." So she addressed this new gopi, "Oh, Kanaka Manjari, welcome home." But in the ecstasy of seeing his worshipable deity, Dukhi Krishnadas, as Kanaka Manjari, upon seeing Srimati Radharani, it was just too much for him. And it said, quote, "To the amusement and the curiosity of the other gopis, he fainted." And this time he fainted at the feet of Srimati Radharani on the throne. And when he came to, Lalita Saki said to him, or let's say her, "Here's my sister. Here's my sister. You wanted to know whether she could be the rightful owner of that anklet. So what do you think? What do you think?" And it's written that in his gopi body, as Kanaka Manjari, Dukhi Krishnadas gazed at Sri Radha, the gopis, and the kunj, and his senses and mind became, quote, "overwhelmed by the inconceivable grandeur of the sweet rural atmosphere surrounding him." Overwhelmed by the inconceivable grandeur of the sweet rural atmosphere surrounding him. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki. Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani. Lalita Vishaka Devi ki. Kanaka Manjari ki. So unable to speak, he or she simply reached out to give Radha that magical anklet. And as he did so, Sri Radha pulled him towards her with her right hand, and she gratefully accepted the ornament with her left hand. Then she said, Sri Radha said, quote, "We like to hear the words of Krishna, but we love to hear isn't it the words of Sri Radha?" She said, quote, "I'm very pleased with your devotion and with the service you render by sweeping this kunj. I want to bless you through the anklet you have brought back to me," unquote. Then what did she do? Then she pressed that anklet into Kanaka Manjari's, or let us say Dukhi Krishnadas's forehead, leaving a mark that had the shape of Sri Radha's lotus foot, the size of our tilak. She placed that, and that mark became the shape of Sri Radha's lotus foot. And then the Shastra says, and I quote because it's also important, "Then Srimati Radharani mixed sandalwood paste, camphor, honey, along with saffron, and rubbed the mixture onto a moonstone. And using part of the anklet, she very affectionately made a resplendent dot in the middle of the new tilak on the forehead of that doe-eyed Manjari. Affectionately made a resplendent dot in the middle of the new tilak on the forehead of that doe-eyed Manjari. That doe-eyed Manjari, Dukhi Krishnadas. And once that was done, Lalita Saki spoke up, and she gave a name to that tilak with this resplendent dot in the middle. She called it Sham Mohana. Sham Mohan. Then Srimati Radharani said, quote, "From today on, your name will be Shyamananda," meaning one who gives bliss to Sri Radha. Shyamananda, that's your new name. She said, continue in your service, and one day you will be able to live with me forever. And as she said that, his new name, Shyamananda, appeared inscripted on his chest. It was written on his chest. Written there. Not something you could wipe away. It was written on his chest. And then Srimati Radharani requested our Shyamananda, Duki Krishna Das, Kanaka Manjari, and now the great Syamananda Pandit. I was telling you how special a historical personality he is. She requested that he return to the mortal world, to the material world, and share his good fortune with others. However, the prospect of impending separation from Sri Radha caused Shyamananda to start crying uncontrollably. And with tears in his eyes, he begged Sri Radha, please don't send me back to the mortal world, to the material world. Don't deprive me of service to your lotus feet. And it's written so nicely that that appeal to her melted her heart with pity. And to relieve Shyamananda's distress, she manifested from her heart a beautiful deity of Shamsundar Krishna. Srimati Radharani, she manifested from her heart a deity of Lord Shamsundar, Tridibanga Sundar, Krishna, threefold bending form. And she gave it to Lalita Saki and asked Lalita Saki to give it to Shyamananda. Then she said to Shyamananda, my dear Shyamananda, as long as you live in the mortal world, you should keep yourself engaged in the loving service and worship of this deity. In this way, you will not suffer due to separation from me. After that, you will come back to my eternal service in the eternal abode. And then she gave 12 blessings to whoever renders service to that deity in this material world. Blessings, which means that we can also share in the good fortune of Syamananda Pandit. And that's why they live, these devotees. They live to share the good fortune with us, so we should open our hearts up and accept it without any conditions. So this deity of Shyamasundar is there in Vrindavan at the Radha Shyamasundar temple, one of the 7 main temples in Vrindavan that the sadhus visit in the morning and the evening. It's a small deity, and he's on the side of the big deities. If you've been there, you know there's big deities of Radha Shyamasundar, and those big deities were actually deities worshipped by Baladev Vidyabhushana. Baladev Vidyabhushana. We discussed him the other day in a pastime of how he came to Jaipur to defend our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. Baladev Vidyabhushana. The big deities were his, but the small deity of Shyamasundar is just off to the left. I think it's the left there, yeah. And you can take that deity manifested from the heart of Radharani. And she gave 12 blessings to whoever can render service to that deity. Now, of course, we may not be allowed to go on the altar and render any service. You can give donations. Or you can simply go and one service to Krishna is to chant his holy name. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Shmaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Bandham, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. These are the processes. So hearing and chanting, remembering and worshipping the lotus feet, consider all this as glorification or service to Krishna. So you can go in front of that deity and have kirtan. Jaya Radha Sham Sundar Radha Sham Sundar Shri Radhe. Hare Krishna, give some donation, take some sweets. Now, what are the 12 blessings? Well, they're quite they're quite long, actually, but this is what we're here for. Krishna Katha. I will read them to all of you. It's going to take a minute or two, but we want to get her blessings. So these are the 12 blessings she is giving, Radharani, eternally to anyone who renders service to that deity that manifested from her heart. Number 1, whoever has darshan of this deity, even once with devotion, shall obtain prem bhakti and go to the rarely attained divine abode of Sri Krishna and never be born again. Misfortunes, poverty, and heinous sins shall not enter his home. 2, whoever has regular darshan of this deity will go to the rarely attained divine abode of Sri Krishna, accompanied by 10 past and 10 future generations. In this world, accompanied by sons, grandsons, and other relatives, they shall enjoy life in happiness, wealth, and opulence, desired even by the demigods. They shall move around fearless, like a lion freed from the blazing trap of the threefold miseries caused by one's mind, by other living entities, and natural forces. Number 3, whoever regularly cleans the temple of Shri Shamsundar shall go to the heavenly planets, and after enjoying all pleasures there, shall attain the abode of Lord Krishna as one of his attendants and obtain the bliss of his service. If one regularly smears the temple with cow dung after cleansing it, then the relatives of their mother, father, and spouse will never go to hell. Number 4, any pious person who places a flag on top of the temple of Sri Shamsundar and decorates it with banners shall immediately become free from all sins committed since birth. 5, a fortunate great soul who regularly worships the deity shall attain the power to deliver the whole world, and all his desires will be fulfilled. And remember, one of the offenses to the holy name is to consider the glories of chanting Hare Krishna, the process of devotional service, as exaggeration. This is the full truth and nothing but the truth here. Number 6, a fortunate person who gives new garments to this deity shall reside on the moon planet and then attain bliss in the abode of Lord Hari. They should become wealthy, fortunate, disease-free, and attractive. They shall obtain the fruits of having performed the Ashwamedha and the Rajasuya Yajnas, and then live eternally in the abode of Lord Hari. We're hearing all these blessings that they're on the way. The real blessing is in almost every verse. The worshippers going back home, back to Gaida, but it's describing what's going to happen on the way. Number 7, a rich person who offers precious ornaments studded with pearls and gems to the deity of Lord Shyamasundar shall become the emperor of the whole earth, the destroyer of the enemies, free from all sins, dear to the ladies, and supremely fortunate, and after obtaining the fruits of having performed the Ashwamedha and the Rajasuya Yajnas, he will reside eternally in the abode of Lord Krishna. If being full of devotion, one shall have the fortune of even once having the darshan of Sri Shamsundar adorned with golden ornaments, then all his relatives will go back, all his relatives going back 7 generations will be delivered. If one full of devotion shall have the good fortune of even once having the darshan of Sri Syamasundar adorned with golden ornaments, then all his relatives going back 7 generations will be delivered. There's more. 8, a pious person who offers the deity flower ornaments, an umbrella made of flowers, a pavilion made of flowers, a bed made of flowers, etc., shall obtain the best objects of enjoyment, amusement, and pleasure, and at the end shall go to the eternal abode of Lord Shyamasundar. 9. A fortunate person who shall offer first-class foodstuffs and beverages to this deity shall have all their wishes fulfilled. They will become long-lived, rich, powerful, handsome, attractive, and freed from worries and diseases. They will obtain the fruits of so many different types of yajnas, and at the end, go back home, back to Godhead. 10. Whoever circumambulates the temple of Shyamasundar 4 times with a heart full of devotion shall obtain the fruits of having circumambulated the whole universe, having visited all holy places and having bathed in all of them. They shall become free from all sins, attain the fruits of having performed 10 Aswamedha yajnas, again, and at the end shall be carried by a swan to Lord Krishna's own abode. They will never be born again, and all their good wishes will be fulfilled. 11. A fortunate person who has darshan of Sri Shyamasundar during the Artik shall obtain the fruits of all worship, mantras, and rituals previously performed, even if these were given up by the devotee before. Millions of sins committed, even the killing of a brahmana or illicit intercourse, shall be destroyed, and at the end they shall attain the supreme abode of Lord Krishna. And finally, number 12. If a fortunate person constructs, renovates, and cleanses the temple of Shyamasundar, then 10,000s of past and future generations in his family, they'll all go to the abode of Lord Krishna. All the sins committed by them shall be burnt into ashes, and they shall very soon attain the bliss of serving Lord Krishna. Sri Shyamasundar ki, Sri Radha Shyamasundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani ki. So again, that deity which these verses are speaking about, which came from the mouth of Srimati Radharani, that deity is in Vrindavan. And that deity is in the Radha Shyamasundar temple at the feet of Shyam. So after hearing this today, put that on your transcendental bucket list. When you come to Vrindavan, go straight to that temple. And know that Radharani's blessings never go in vain. So then, we're still there in that eternal realm of Vrindavan with Radharani. So then the newly named Shyamananda, he bowed down to Srimati Radharani. And when he looked up, everything had changed. Radha, Lalita, Vishaka, all the Braja Gopis, the eternal realm of Vrindavan, it had all vanished. And once again, he was in the garden, where he had found the anklet, back as a brahmachari, in the clothes of a brahmachari. But by the touch of the Manju Gosha, that anklet from Srimati Radharani's left foot, his iron spade had become golden. And looking at himself in the reflection of a puddle of water nearby, he saw that he himself, his complexion had also changed. He also had a golden aura to him. And looking into that water, he saw on his forehead, there was the Shyam Mohan tilak in the form of Radha's foot, with that special dot in the middle. And on his chest was written his name, Shyamananda. So then, with that divine deity, he has the deity in his hand, manifest from the heart of Radharani. He put the deity on his head, and while shedding tears, and with his heart overwhelmed with love, he started running to Jiva Goswami's Bhajan Kutir to tell him everything that had happened. And everything that happened after this particular point, which is just as amazing as everything that I've shared with you today, I will share with you in the next lecture. We'll keep you on the edge of your seat for a few more days. The next lecture will be entitled Syamananda Pandit, Part 2. And there's a lot of nectar. There's a lot of nectar. This is the best way to spend our time in this human form of life, hearing this Braj Katha, or hearing the Gora Katha. Why let our minds wander to something temporary and full of stress and anxiety in this world? All the news that comes out today. We just spend our days hearing this Katha and chanting the holy names of the Lord and telling our friends about it. But before we finish, I want to answer the question that we posed earlier, and that is why Srimati Radharani sent Lalita to the Kunj to find the ankle bell, when generally that service could have gone to a Manjari, a maidservant. And the answer is that Radharani sent Lalita Saki to the Kunj for two reasons. Number one, to find the anklet, but number two, to bring Dukhi Krishna Das to her so she could bless him, because she was so pleased with his service. And therefore the deeper meaning is that without the grace of Lalita Saki, one cannot come in direct contact with Sri Radha. That's what the Acharyas say. Without the grace of Lalita Saki, no one can come in direct contact with Sri Radha. It's said, even if they have the sponsorship of some other gopi. Even if they have the sponsorship of some other gopi. And that may be one reason that we see in many of our ISKCON temples, we have Radha and Krishna, and then we have Lalita and Vishaka on either side. We consider ourselves servant of the servant of the servant of the servant. And fortunately, we go through all these servants, and their combined mercy makes us qualified to approach the divine couple. And this fact that we must get the grace of Lalita Saki to approach Sri Radha, that's also made very clear in Rupa Goswami's Lalita Ashtakam, verses 7 and 9, which I will read to you, recite to you. Quote, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the supremely charming Sri Lalita Devi, the treasure house of all good qualities. Upon seeing any young maiden anywhere in Braj, and discerning that she is inclined towards her Priya Shaki, Srimati Radharani, Lalita immediately tells Radha that she must accept this person in her own party. Radha obeys Lalita, who thus fulfills that maiden's desires. So there's some new gopi, and she wants to be Radha Dasi, she wants to serve Radha, so Lalita informs Radha, and on the advice of Lalita, and these are all things we must learn, and one day we will, hopefully, by Prabhupada's grace, employ these secrets of devotional service to attain perfection. And the second verse from Lalita Ashtakam, quote, if a devotee with a cheerful and pure heart recites this Ashtakam, because there's 8 verses, in praise of Lalita Devi, then such a devotee will be affectionately brought into Srimati Radharani's own group of Sakis. Lalita Devi is supremely ornamented with beauty, grace, and charm, and along with Srimati Radharani is the effulgent, wish-fulfilling creeper, Kalpavali, of Vrishabhanu Maharaja's family that winds around the Kalpavriksha of Krishna. It's very deep. But the message is there. Lalita Saki is very important to us because we want to approach the divine couple, we want to approach Sri Radha, so now we know that, and we'll keep that in mind. We'll keep that in mind. So Radharani sent Lalita to get Dukhi Krishna Das, because only by Lalita's grace could he attain the grace of Srimati Radharani. And in the meantime, she got back her favorite anklet. So I'm going to conclude with just a couple more verses glorifying Shyamananda Pandit. We started with the Dukhi, and then we end up with the beautiful name of Shyamananda Pandit. I began the class with a couple of verses from the Shyamananda Satakam by Rasikananda Murari Das, his disciple. So just to conclude today, we'll read 3 verses that he wrote in glorification of his spiritual master. To further drive home into our hearts this divine sadhu, Syamananda Pandit, who, besides being a very deep rasik devotee, he was a powerful preacher. Powerful preacher. And that's why many devotees, they find Narottam das Thakur, Srinivas Acarya, and Syamananda Pandit, all trained up by Srila Jiva Goswami in Vrindavan, into the deepest depths of understanding Krishna consciousness. All rasika. They were very practical, innovative, courageous, determined, energetic preachers, and not just preaching to the brahmanas and the royalty, but to the down and outs, to the most unfortunate, imbibing that mood of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as a Yuga avatar, to bring this message of Braja Bhakti to the most fallen people of Kali Yuga. This is the most amazing thing, the topmost message to the most unqualified. And therefore, as we've said before, when Rupa Goswami first set eyes upon the beautiful form of Gauranga, the combined form of Radha and Krishna, this Yuga avatar, he said, Namo Mahabhadanaya, Krishna Prem Padayate, Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Guru Tushay Namaha. There's never been a more merciful incarnation of Krishna than Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because he's giving this highest message to the most fallen people of Kali Yuga. Therefore, the demigods are lining up on the heavenly planets to take birth in this movement, and we are in this movement. This is our now. Not that later I'll become serious or I'll put it off. Now, to chant from the heart, study the Shastras, worship Guru, worship Gauranga, worship Srila Prabhupada, spread the message all over the world. This is our work. We should spend as much time as we can doing that. Of course, we have the practical affairs. We have to maintain this body and our family, and we have our roles in society. But this is our heartbeat. This is our heartbeat. So therefore, Syamananda Pandit and Srinivas and Narottam, they're my heroes. Some of my heroes. Actually, all our acharyas are heroes, but they were second generation. They took up where Mahaprabhu left off. He could have inundated the whole world, but we're always begging for service. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Give me Seva, give me Seva. Okay, here's some Seva. Take this book, go out. Get onto the internet and preach. Movement means it's always moving on, generation after generation. So here's some final verses in which we hear this person who's so dear to our hearts, so dear to our hearts, Syamananda Pandit. His disciple, you could say, probably knows him best. He writes, I offer my respectful obeisances to Krishnananda's exalted son, Sri Syamananda. He is great mercy personified. He is the captain of the boat, desiring to rescue the people drowning in the horrible, impassable ocean of repeated birth and death. He came to this world, bringing with him the wonderful boat of pure love for Lord Krishna, a boat that at once takes one to the further shore. Let me offer my respectful obeisances to Sri Syamananda, who is an ocean of mercy. He is kindness and spiritual love personified. His face is always cheerful with spiritual love. He's a soldier who defeats the horrible sufferings of life in the material world. By his merciful embrace, they who are tortured by the flames of Kali Yuga's torments find themselves plunged in the nectar of Lord Krishna's pastimes. Lord Krishna, who is the life's master of the Braja girls, the master of the life of the Braja girls. And finally, glory to a saintly and wonderful, powerful person, a person who is the master of masters, a person who, with his saintly virtues, delights the pious, a person who respectfully leads even the wicked to the path of devotional service. Respectfully leads the wicked to the path of devotional service. We don't think they're demons. We just think, they're unfortunate. We don't think ourselves better than them. We think of ourselves more fortunate than them. So respectfully, we take the fallen people of this world back with us, back home, back to Godhead. A person who, with his great learning, pleases the learned. A person with his glorious form, filled with the nectar of love for Lord Krishna, delights the whole world. Sri Syamananda Pandit ki, Srila Jiva Goswami ki, Hridaya Chaitanya, his spiritual master ki, Shamsundar ki, Sri Shivara Shamasundar ki, Sri Vrindavan Dham ki, Gauranga Mahaprabhu ki, Lord Nityananda ki, Panchatattva ki, Mayapur Dham ki. So thank you, everyone, so much for this opportunity to glorify one of my favorite persons. And the good news, there's always good news in Krishna consciousness. The good news is that we have part two. And I'm already researching it, and there's some nectar there. So I look forward to, as your humble servant, sharing this knowledge with you, and we'll see you in a few days. Shyamananda Pandit ki, Shri Shivara Shamasundar ki, Shri Prabhupada ki, Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Shamasundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani ki, back home, back to Godhead ki, Goloka Vrindavan Dham ki. Everybody with us. Go Premanandi, Jai Jai Sisi Radhe, Sham and Shyamananda Pandit. Thank you. Hare Krishna.